This is one of the most unique apple desserts I've ever come across. It has a layer of short crust pastry, shredded cinnamon apples, then a layer of meringue and shredded short crust on top of that. In the Czech Republic, they call this Hraběnčiny řezy, or Countess Slices, or the Countess's cake. In today's video, we're going to explore the mystery behind that name and also see how versions of this have popped up all over Central and Eastern Europe. I'm Kristen, and on Bake Across Europe, I explore the history and traditions behind European baking, guided by the recipes I've encountered while traveling and exploring new ones along the way. Today we're going to learn how to make Countess Slices and explore the history behind this beloved Central and Eastern European dessert. So let's get started. I'm starting by making the short crust pastry, and I'm using a food processor because I find that it comes together easiest this way, but you can absolutely do this without one. Just rub all of the ingredients together by hand in a large bowl. I'm adding flour, powdered sugar, and baking powder, and then I'm just giving that a quick pulse to combine. Then I'm adding in cubed chilled butter and pulsing that until it resembles wet sand. Next, I added in 4 egg yolks, and I set the egg whites aside because I'm going to use that later for the meringue, and I'm going to cover them and keep them at room temperature because you need them to be at room temperature to make meringue. Once the dough came together in my food processor, I dumped it out onto my countertop and I just gave it a quick knead to bring it all together into a smooth dough. Then I divided it into thirds, and 1/3 of it I put wrapped up in the freezer because we're going to use that later to grate it on top. And then the rest I'm rolling out to fit my 9x13 cake pan. I find that it's easiest to transfer dough from the countertop to a cake pan if you roll it out on parchment paper. So I'm just rolling it roughly the size of the 9x13 pan, flipping that over, and then pressing it into the bottom of the pan. And I just picked up one of these little pastry rollers. They're so convenient for rolling and fitting a pastry at the bottom of a pan. But if you don't have one, you can just place a piece of parchment paper over it and use the bottom of a measuring cup to smooth out your pastry. Then I just set this aside and put it in the fridge to chill while I worked on the apple filling. I used 4 large apples for this recipe, and I peeled them and grated them with a box grater. And as I was grating them, I put them over a colander and squeezed out the excess juice so that they wouldn't have any extra liquid over that pastry base, so it wouldn't become soggy. I did quite a bit of research when looking into this cake, and unfortunately this is just one of those recipes where it's really hard to trace the origins of it, though this is very much a part of Czech cuisine. Everybody's mother and grandmother has their own version of this cake, though even though it's very much a Czech recipe, it's also found in neighboring countries. You can find this in Poland and Germany and Austria as well. Now, the name is what's most confusing. Why is this called Countess Slices or Countess Cuts or Cake of the Countess? It depends which language you're using. I searched archival websites that included old 19th century Czech cookbooks, and I was able to find recipes for this style of cake. Though there were 2 key differences. They didn't have the grated pastry on top, and they weren't called Countess Slices. So that's the real mystery. They were really just called apple cake or apple slices, but this style of cake with the apples and the meringue on top was very much a part of Czech cuisine even way back in the 19th century. Now, the Germans also have this cake, and they also call it Kuchen der Gräfin, which means cake of the Countess or Countess's cake. But the Poles, they also have a version. Some of theirs, you can either swap in apples or plum jam, but it also has the meringue and the shredded pastry. And the Poles have a different name for it. It's called, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing this right, Pleśniak, which means mildew or mold. So their name for the cake is more about its resemblance and does not say anything about a countess. Just like my research with the Czech cookbooks. I also went back and looked through archival recipe books in German, and I couldn't find anything that referenced Countess's cake or Countess Slices. So who is the Countess it's named after? Is it even named after a countess? Is this just a name somebody slapped on the cake and thought, that sounds creative, I'm gonna call it that? Who knows? We're never gonna find out probably. If for some reason you know the history of this cake, please comment below and guide me towards more definitive research of where it comes from. Similar to making a zucchini bread, when you squeeze out the excess liquid from the zucchini to add it to the cake, I'm squeezing out the excess juice from the apples and then sprinkling those over the chilled short crust base. Then I'm sprinkling on a packet of vanilla sugar and 2 tablespoons of granulated sugar mixed with a ½ teaspoon of cinnamon. Now onto the meringue. I'm adding my 4 leftover room temperature egg whites to the bowl of my stand mixer with the whisk attachment and beating them on medium-high and adding 4 tablespoons of granulated sugar. As they whisk and become frothy, then add in those a little bit at a time. You'll see I added powdered sugar in the video, but later I altered the recipe to be granulated sugar because that actually gives a lot more structure and glossiness to the meringue than powdered sugar does because of that added cornstarch. So that's the one change I made to this recipe. You'll want to beat them until stiff peaks form and they become glossy and shiny. Mine never got quite to that stage because I used that powdered sugar, but you should be able to easily reach that stage with the addition of granulated sugar instead. Then I just spooned the meringue over the apples and smoothed out the top surface. And then I took the short crust pastry out of the freezer and I used my box grater to grate that over the top of the meringue. This will bake at 350 Fahrenheit or 180 Celsius for about 35 minutes. Once it came out of the oven, I set it on a cooling rack and let it come to room temperature before slicing into it. One tip for baking is I really recommend watching it in the last few minutes because you'll notice the top of mine got burnt really quickly. Just in the last 30 seconds or so of being in the oven, that top turned really brown. So just keep an eye on it as it finishes. I'm really looking forward to trying this because I've never had apples and meringue together. So let's see what it tastes like. Wow, that's really good. The short crust is a lot lighter than I was expecting, but I suppose that would be because of the addition of the baking powder. It doesn't have that hard texture that pie crust has. The apples are so flavorful. And the meringue, you don't notice it all that much. It just adds almost like a sweet, creamy layer to this. I think my initial reaction is this tastes almost like I would describe it like an apple crumble cake. This is really good. I will definitely be making this again, and I can see why this is served in every Czech household. It is so good. Very autumnal, especially with that cinnamon in there. I also forgot to mention in the video that you sometimes see people put crushed walnuts over the apples as well. So that's an option if you want to add a little crunchy element of nuts in with the apples. Now, if you want another really unique Czech dessert, they seem to be on a roll with really unique things in the Czech Republic. Watch this video next for Wallachian Frgal. These are, I guess what I would describe as almost like a sweet pizza. You'll have to watch the video to see what I'm talking about, but it's really interesting and very unique. So watch that next, and I'll see you next time.